Hello and welcome to the 5th video of this series about creating CRUD pages using NextJS and Redux-Observable. In the previous video, we have added pagination and record deletion in our data table of user information using Redux-Observable. If you find this video helpful, please subscribe. In today's video, we will implement the Add User feature. We will create the API, actions, epics, and finally the GUI with form and validation. We will begin by adding the Add API in Next.js. Open Pages, API, Users, Index.js. Add an else if clause that will handle the post request method. Get the user from the request body. We can check Prisma's documentation on how to create a new record. Let's check if the birth date is not empty. Convert it to UTC. And call the toDate function. Make sure to import the moment library. Let's create the user using Prisma's client. Return the newly created user in the response as a JSON object and set the status to 200. Add an else statement that will return an invalid method exception with status 405 or method not allowed. Next, we will edit the user module under Source Redux Modules. Add a new action states, add user. Add a new case statement in the reducer when adding a user is successful. Payload.user is the response that we set from the API, the newly created user. Save this value in the reducer. Same as with delete, we will now add the action creators to create user start, success, and fail. Create user start will accept the user we are making and the router for navigation as the parameters. Create user oak will accept the router as its parameter to navigate after a successful save. And create user KO will accept the error information and save them in the reducer. Notice that all the parameters are kept inside the payload property. We're simply grouping them for easier access inside the reducer switch statement. Likewise, let's create the user epic of type create user start. Let's remove the null values. There's no need to post them on the API. Let's call the HTTP post method from the Rx backend, which sets the config to use the post method in the request method from the universal RxJS Ajax library. The URL should be API users, and the body should contain the user information. Then, we will use a pipe and call create user oak action creator, passing the router if the user is saved successfully. Again, this router variable is extracted from the payload that we passed from the create user action creator. Why do we need the route? Let's create a new action state, redirect to user's page. It doesn't need any reducer case. Let's add the action creator, where we set the type to redirect to user's page success. Let's add an epic that handles the create user oak action state. It gets the router from the payload and redirects to the user's page. Let's export the newly created epics. We're now done with the action creators. It's now time to work on the GUI. Under source views user, create a new JavaScript file user detail. Make it a functional component. Under pages, create a new file id.js, making it a functional component as well. This is our page where Next.js will route the request for users ID. Import and render the user detail component. Don't forget to export the user detail component under views, user, index.js file. It will allow us to import this component with just the views user path. In the user detail component, let's display a hello message for now. Let's add a button to edit the user on our users page. Let's create an action that pushes the URL users ID. Define a constant variable router from user router hook. Let's run the application. And accessing the path users ID should show a hello message. Always double check that you have imported all the dependencies and don't have any compile time issues. Now we can see the list page, but we have a 404 error. Can you guess why? Because the id.js file is under pages. It should be under pages, users. Now we can see the user detail page. To avoid typing a whole bunch of code, I'll just copy and paste the form that asks for first name, last name, email, and birth date. Import all the components. In this form, we are using a custom defined hook, use Formik. You can visit their website for detailed documentation. This is exactly what we're using. We need to define our initial user, the onSubmit function, which accepts the form values. Unfortunately, the birth date value from the lab is not yet supported, so we need to convert its value to ISO standard. Let's get the dispatch utility and dispatch the create user action creator with the form values as a parameter along with the router. We need to define the validation schema as well. That is a UP object with the fields from our form and rules to validate them. For example, we tell it to make the email field required. Let's import UP. Don't forget to add an onSubmit action to the form with the Formik handler. The form will call the onSubmit function that dispatches the create user action creator when the form is submitted. It then passes through the create user epic that calls the create user API. If the request is successful, it will call the create user action creator that sets the action status to success. This is filtered by another epic that redirects to the user's page. Let's examine the form. Here we use Formik library for error handling and collecting the form values aside from birth date. Note that we are using the localization provider from MUI, which is very new. Create the state to save the birth date. We need to provide a date adapter. There are several options from MUI like date FNS. There we have our edit page. Let's try the cancel button, which redirects to the user's page. Click the add button and let's fill up the form. Finally, hit the save button. When testing, always use the browser's debugging tools. I've also added some logs to debug the program and data flows. Our user is not added. Let's see what's wrong. Seems like we forgot to import the moment library. Unfortunately, the record that we have added is at the end of the database table, so we need to add a sort to our query. Make sure to refer to Prisma's documentation. Here, we can sort using the order by keyword. Let's apply it to our query. Sort by ID, descending. Let's see if it works. In the API, in the GUI. And there you have it, our newly inserted record with a properly formatted date. In summary, we have implemented the add user functionality of our form. In the next and final video, we will implement the last feature, edit.